Welcome to Modern Marketing Messages, the leading podcast discussing the latest and greatest in both online and offline marketing tactics, strategies, and trends. I'm your host, Taylor Karg, marketing content writer at AmericanEagle.com. In this episode, we're going to explore the different factors behind website design. To do that, I have here with me Noah Aird, senior graphic designer at AmericanEagle.com. Noah, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Excited to be here.
Do you mind telling me a little bit about your role, how long you've been with AmericanEagle.com, and a little bit about, your day-to-day responsibilities here?
Yeah, so senior graphic designer, I started about a year and a half ago, so relatively new. Having an absolutely fantastic time so far. I operate out of the experience design team and the types of things we work on. So senior graphic designer is kind of an all-encompassing broad term. But my main responsibility is in regards to the website designs.
Okay.
In specific, working on both UX design, that's user experience design, that's kind of my beta skill. Then my primary and alpha skill is user interface design. UX design being kind of the functionality behind the websites and how they address the business goals. And UI design being more of the look and feel and the visual side of things. So outside of those, that main priority, we also work on other creative projects, logo design, branding, decks, sometimes print design, not too often. Graphic design, of course, we have a marketing design team that does a lot of that. So sometimes we pitch in. So a lot of mostly digital creative projects.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. And I'm happy to learn more about all of this today because I feel like it's like way over my head, a lot of the terms. Just a quick question. What did you study in college that this kind of like became your career path?
Yeah, I kind of took an unorthodox path. I was more computer science.
Oh, okay.
But I've always had like an artistic side. And as a designer, you're not fully in the art field. It's kind of like a portion of being a designer, and the other part is kind of like psychology and human interaction, and then the computer science side behind how websites are built. So I started off there with my bachelor's, and then after that, I wanted to get into how to create websites, and I wasn't sure how that was done. So as I was going through school, you kind of figure out that it's segregated into design and development.
Yeah.
And I was trained in both, but leaned more towards the design side. And it got my first job doing design, and it just kind of grew from there.
Oh, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get into the different factors of website design, can you walk us through your typical design process? How do you get from start to finish?
Sure. And this is going to be a long answer, so bear with me.
Oh, that's okay. Tell us everything.
So before we start on a project, and on the whole, we'll usually get kind of a quick brief from the project manager, understanding the scope of the project. We're always going to do a homepage design and then interior pages, just depending on, what the client signs up for. And then we'll kind of see maybe a site map, which will inform us of the navigation and kind of like a bird's eye view of what the whole project looks like. Then we'll start with a kickoff call with the client, and we'll kind of try and pull as much information from them as possible. When I design, less is usually more, but when we get information from the clients, more is more. So we'll ask them things from the onboarding documentation, that the information that they provide. If they have a brand guideline, what does that look like? What do we have to consider from it? They'll fill out kind of website examples, either in their industry or outside of it, that they like or dislike, and then we'll walk through the rationale of why, of what they do or don't like. Then we'll probe them for any other things like needs and wants, things that have to be on the website based on stakeholder interest, and then wants like nice to haves that it would be fun if we could incorporate. So we'll kind of go through that process, get as much information up front as we can. And then next, I like to do a little bit of research on my own. So take that information that we gleaned from them and then go out into the internet, find examples that I can draw inspiration and ideas from. For example, if a client has like a very vivid color scheme, I'll go find websites that have vivid color schemes and see how they're applying the colors, especially to different UI elements. And so once I have enough information and inspiration, and then the information from the client, that's when I'll start designing. So I'll set up my Figma file. That's the program we use for design. And we'll start with the homepage, we'll set up our artboards, and we'll work top to bottom. And typically the navigation will reflect the sitemap to a certain extent. And if there is a UX phase, we'll have a wireframe. If not, we might get a general idea of the structure from the client during that initial discovery call. And we'll go top to bottom creating that design using their branding, using best practice for everything, keeping accessibility in mind. And at the same time, we're also going to be building out either a high level or base level design system. So how we're treating calls to actions, buttons, toggles, switches, drawers, how we treat cards and tiles.
What's a drawer?
A drawer is kind of like where content's hidden.
Okay.
Though sometimes it's a plus sign or a drop down arrow,
okay.
And then it'll open and show content. So compartmentalized
Gotcha.
information. So different interactive elements. So we'll start building those out, as well as like font styles, text styles, everything that's going to cascade across the rest of the site that sort of started in line with the homepage design. So we'll build out that base level design system. We'll create the homepage design. We'll present it to the client. We'll give them some time to digest it and give us feedback. We'll go through a few rounds of revisions. And then once it's approved, we'll repeat that process across the interior pages. After we get approved designs for all of the pages, we'll then kind of clean up the files, make sure the assets are ready for export, and there's a clean handoff to the front-end developers who are then going to build that design into an actual site.
Awesome. What is without naming the name of a client, what is like one of your favorite designs you've done while working at AmericanEagle.com, and why?
I have a lot.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. There was one, try not to be specific. There's an association of educators in the field of computer science. And they had a very vivid color scheme, and their style lended itself to a particular design movement that I'm a fan of. And I don't get to really design in this style often.
Oh.
So it was really fun that I got to do that.
Yeah.
Kind of a theme that I don't normally get to traverse towards.
And I love anything with vivid colors, so I feel like it was probably really cool. And we'll talk more about like design trends and movements later on, so you can talk more about that next time. Alrighty, let's get into the factors of web design. And when it comes to web design, I feel like there's a lot of important factors. There's a variety. So let's start with the first one, responsive design. I feel like responsive design is kind of an older term these days. Is it safe to assume that a website is always going to be designed to work across multiple devices? Is that the case?
Yeah. So responsive design, everything we design is responsive. With the rise of mobile phones and tablets, there's all these different viewports and screen sizes. The three main ones being your desktop, your tablet, and your mobile. So you really want one design that fits all three. Back before responsive design was a thing, there was adaptive design. So you kind of had a website design and a mobile design, but they were disconnected. So it kind of, if you had SEO or marketing strategies, you kind of had to do it twice to cater to both mediums. Yeah. So responsive design, combine them into one website that fits all these screen sizes.
So how do you approach designing a website to ensure that it is responsive?
Between those three kind of viewport categories, desktop and tablet are very similar. So we kind of only tackle the desktop design, and then mobile is kind of a different sort of experience from the desktop. You're making everything modular and then compartmentalized. So also for the sake of time, we're only going to do like a desktop design and then a mobile design. And it also depends on the project. Sometimes we'll do tablet designs if that's part of the scope. But we typically have a standardized artboard for both of these screen sizes.
Oh, okay.
On desktop, it's 1920 pixels. Mobile, it's 375. And those kind of cover your bases for across those three viewport sizes. So as long as we have those covered, the design should be flexible to fit the majority of screen sizes, because between different manufacturers and different sizes, everything gets bigger or smaller.
Yeah, from one version, you can have the 12 that's, this big, and then the 14 that's this big.
Right. So it's almost impossible to account for all of those with multiple designs. So we kind of like hit a nice window and target.
Have you ever ran into any challenges with implementing a responsive design? Say like any particular graphical elements that are harder to make, responsively than others?
Yes. Tables are one. That one's a kind of pretty big thorn in my side. It's a lot of information depending on the table. Some of them can be more complex than others. And on desktop, it's easy to show rows and columns and all the information contained. But when it lays out nicely horizontally. But when you get to a mobile device, everything is more suited vertically. Mm-hmm. So you kind of have to do your research, go out and see how people are pulling off a responsive table from desktop to mobile. And then there's different ways you can tackle it. You can have on mobile, maybe the full table is kind of hidden off to the side and you can scroll horizontally to show the information. Sometimes you have to chunk out the rows so that all the information is contained together, and then it stacks below. You can leverage drawers and sliders for the information, but it gets really complex. So tables are one, and then the other one that I'm actually working on right now for community college is their events calendar.
Okay, yeah.
So again, on desktop, it's easy to show, and it is almost in a table format. You have your month view with all your days, and then they have all these departments with all these events. But when you get down to mobile, that's such a small screen size to show that information. So you kind of have to create multiple screens and steps to get through all of the information. So potentially showing the month with just the number of events, clicking into a day, and then showing all the applicable events for that day. So the experience changes and can get rather complex. So those are the two that really cause me fits.
It seems like then, because of all those extra steps, that mobile design probably takes longer, like when working on a project than desktop would.
For the most part, when you get to those two pieces, yes. But we're designing mobile first.
Okay.
So we're keeping mobile, again, everything's modular.
Yeah.
And the design program we use, which is called Figma, we're setting everything up so that once you go down to mobile, you're just kind of reorganizing things. And it's actually pretty quick to go from desktop to mobile. It's just when you get to those complex sections and components, those are where it kind of eats up some of your time.
Gotcha. So moving on to the second factor that we're going to talk about today, which is branding. When it comes to branding, what are some key considerations when incorporating logos, colors, and fonts into website design that marketers should be aware of?
Definitely. So brand guidelines, they can all vary. Some of them are more basic than others. They all usually tackle kind of three main components: logo usage, color scheme, and then fonts and typography. Some of them are more in depth in those three areas. And then some of them might include brand voice, how you're talking about yourself, or how you're using photography, maybe iconography. Those are the more thorough brand guidelines. But we usually get the more basic ones, which are usually more open to interpretation from the designer. You can usually take a brand guideline and go in a lot of different directions. So And a lot of the times when using a brand guideline, say like color usage on a different marketing channel, for example, or design medium, like graphic design, you might be using color in a specific way. You're trying to be eye-catchy or catch the eyes and then get a message across.
Right.
Whereas when you use a color scheme on a website design, using colors primarily for calls to actions, because a website is something that people actually interact with.
Mm-hmm.
So your buttons, your toggles, your form fields. So you're going to leverage the color scheme to make those things stand out so that users know that, okay, this is something I can play with or interact with. So it's important for marketers to understand that you might be applying a color scheme for website design differently than you do for, say, a graphic design or a print design. So keep that in mind. And then when it comes to logos, depending on how your logo is constructed, you have to keep that in mind too. We've got a client now that has a logo that's kind of in a badge. So So the text and the icon are all in one, and it works when it's large. But when you put it on a website where it's small or even on mobile, the text, their business name becomes illegible.
Right. Yeah. It's probably like too small to read.
Exactly. Yeah. So users won't know exactly where they are because the logo tells you that. So we will kind of explore different variations of the logo. Best case scenario is it's composed of two elements, the icon and the word mark, and they're either stacked horizontally or vertically. So for that particular client, we removed the text from the badge, kind of embellished the icon, and then created a word mark. So reformatted their logo so that it was better suitable for a website. So keeping that in mind, that we might have to alter certain things so that they work on that specific medium.
Have any companies ever given you guys pushback or like been angry that you've had to, kind of rework their logo for their website to make it work?
Not usually. I mean, if they do, maybe when we show them on the design, they'll kind of understand, okay, this is not
why you did what you did.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then they'll kind of listen to our decision and then choose to have a web specific logo, but we don't encounter it too often, luckily.
Good. So what happens if a company doesn't have any brand guidelines to work off of at all? Have you experienced certain situations where you've had to work with that, and what kind of happened through there?
Sure. So usually, for the most part, we do get brand guidelines, especially if it's a bigger organization or business. They're going to have that to tie across all their creative. But if they don't have a brand guideline, it's usually a smaller organization or business. Right. And as part of our design process, before we start designing, we do a kickoff call with the client. And if they don't have a brand guideline, which we'll know up front, then we'll kind of, because we send out onboarding documentation and we ask for those types of things. So if they don't have a brand guideline, we'll do kind of like a flash brand discovery call with them. Are we pulling colors from your logo? Is there a color scheme you have in mind? That's usually easy to tackle. And then we'll get into fonts and typography. And if they haven't considered that or don't really have an opinion, then we'll pull up maybe sites that they like or dislike and then kind of narrow down on a certain font that we should use for their brand. So as long as we have those bases covered up front, then we should be safe to proceed with the design.
Yeah, gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So now moving on to design factor number 3, which is site speed. As a designer, how can you design with website performance, specifically site speed in mind when it comes to like fonts, images, and CSS?
So site speed, as it relates to design, is always going to be a give and take. If you wanted the fastest website as possible, it would be all text.
Yeah.
But there's obvious problems with that. It's not going to be engaging. It's going to turn a lot of people off. So you want to incorporate photography, video, different visual elements within it. So there's always going to be a trade-off with site speed. When it comes to like images, you kind of want to limit as many images as possible. Again, there's a trade-off. So you still want a lot of visuals and images, specifically JPEGs and PNGs. But there's ways to kind of compress those down to help mitigate any site speed risks once you're done with the design. Fonts, certain fonts, if they're not formatted properly for the web, they could bog down site speed. So we typically push clients to use Google fonts.
Okay.
Because those are formatted for the web. They're usable across different browsers. And an additional bonus is that they're royalty free. So they don't have to pay a licensing fee for the font.
I didn't know you even had to do that with the font.
Oh, yeah. Because there are actually like designers that design fonts and then sell them.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So you can't just use any old font because you could get into legal problems. And we've had a client before that they were actually licensing a font, and it was $20,000 a year
for a font.
Holy
smokes!
And it wasn't anything special, and it's something that we could have found an easy replacement for on Google Fonts, which would have been free. So maybe something to keep in mind. If you're actually licensing a font, there's probably a free option out there that might even perform better.
Yeah, and save you $20,000
right.
a year.
Yeah. And then when it comes to the CSS, that is kind of CSS is cascading style sheets. So that's colors and kind of attributes, design attributes built in native to the code. So it doesn't bog down site speed necessarily compared to using stylized images. Kind of hard to explain without visuals. But we try to leverage CSS as much as possible so that like colors of backgrounds, colors of text, buttons are all created using CSS to limit any images that we might have to use instead of that.
Is CSS like a tool then? Would you classify it as, or?
It's a front-end language.
Yeah,
okay. So front-end developers, they're using HTML, CSS.
Oh, okay.
Those are kind of like the basic levels, and then they get into like JavaScript.
Gotcha. So speaking of tools, are there any techniques or tools that you employ to strike a balance between, maintaining quality on the site, but also ensuring fast loading times?
Not necessarily tools, with the exception of kind of what I talked about before is if you have images, we will use a compression tool.
Okay.
So it'll be lossless compression. So it'll take the file size of an image down without kind of degrading the quality.
Right. Okay.
So we can do that to kind of mitigate the risks for site speed. That's really kind of the only one. The front-end developers might use tools to gauge how fast a site loads or how slow it loads.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of typically the only tool we use. It's just kind of making sure that we're not using too many photos and videos on a website in high resolution.
I feel like we've all seen a few examples of a website that just has too much going on, and you're like, this is not good.
Right, visually not good, and then site speed too.
Yeah,
performance.
It's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's move on to the design factor number 4, accessibility. What is your role as a graphic designer to ensure that designs are accessible?
So luckily, accessibility is a big focus here at AmericanEagle.com. Luckily, most of the onus is on the developers versus us. But we do have one main priority, and that is color contrast ratios in regards specifically to text. And then again, those interactive elements like buttons, form fields. And these are geared mainly towards people with visual impairments.
Right.
So color blindness.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a certain ratio. It's roughly a 4.5 to 1 ratio of the foreground color, the text, versus the background it's placed on. And we use a tool. There's a bunch of them online, and they'll ask for the hex code for the foreground and background color, and then it'll give you a numerical value of what that ratio is. And a pass-fail if it does or not. And then there's AA accessibility and AAA accessibility. So we at least try to meet the bare minimum. We might go for I believe it's AA is the highest, just depending on the client request.
Yeah. So do you guys have to do that with every single, design
Yes.
that you're making, like every homepage and landing page and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely have to make sure that the color contrast ratios meet that ratio. Otherwise, you're going to risk potentially being sued.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you're not focusing on that for people that might have visual impairments. And there's other minor considerations too, like motion. If there could be people sensitive to motion that might get motion sickness easily. So if there's video or maybe a scrolling banner that's continuous, we have to include play and pause buttons so that they can disable those things so that it doesn't trigger anything.
Yeah, that makes sense. So moving on to design factor number 5, this is design trends and movements. So what are some design trends that you're seeing these days, and how have any of these, influenced your work?
So I'm going to pivot a little to the design movements.
Okay.
I love talking about design movements. I've done presentations on them before. I'm going to do a quick run through of the history of website movements and trends.
Love it. Let's go.
Yeah. So websites can actually be, over time, they're classified into a genre. So kind of like music has different genres: rock, R&B, soul, hip hop, pop music. There will be classifications for website design movements. And the first one covered all of the 90s. It didn't really have a name. It was just kind of like the early days of the web. This is when websites were primitive. They were kind of ugly for the most part. A lot of websites were designed using tables. There wasn't really a traditional navigation established. You can actually look up the old Space Jam website, and the navigation is like a bunch of planets in a solar system instead of like a horizontal or vertical bar. So it's now it would be considered unorthodox. So that,
I gotta look that up.
Yeah, it's something. But after that those dominated in the 90s, and then in the early 2000s, skeuomorphic design kind of surfaced, and Apple was kind of the pioneer of good guy Apple pioneering skeuomorphic design, and that is making your designs look like real world interfaces.
Okay.
So making them kind of 3D looking. And if you look up skeuomorphic design, you'll see examples of what I mean. You'll be like, oh, I remember when websites look like that. You're using a lot of vertical gradients, drop shadows, glossy effects, bevels and embosses, so that like a button actually looks like a pressable button,
right?
Or like a dial looks like when you could reach out and turn.
Yeah.
So that lasted for about a decade, and then with the rise of mobile designs or mobile phones, that prompted responsive design, and skeuomorphism didn't really play nicely with responsive design. So the counterpart to skeuomorphism arrived, which was flat design, which is what everybody usually knows, which is what the majority of our websites are designed under if you had to classify them. And that's essentially taking skeuomorphic design and pressing it in and making it flat. But there are disadvantages and advantages to either one of those. So flat design surfaced in the early 2010s, and then it kind of evolved into flat 2.0. That was the next movement, taking some cues from skeuomorphic design and incorporating them and leveraging them. Then about 5 years ago, we started seeing what's known as brutalist design. Pretty hardcore name.
I looked it up when we were talking about it, when we had our pre-show meeting, and you mentioned brutalist design. I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
So I had to look it up.
It's basically a throwback to the 90s designs. So typical of our society, what's old is new.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of brutalist design because it's very stark and in your face.
Yeah.
If you go the Yale School of Design, their website is actually all brutalist design.
Oh, so I gotta look that up.
You can look it up, shield your eyes.
Yeah.
So that kind of surfaced about 5 years ago, and then design trends kind of picked up speed a little bit, and then we started to see non-grid or broken design, and that was kind of like websites where the layout was unpredictable and sporadic, and there's a lot of overlapping elements. You still see it a little bit now, but that kind of started roughly 5-ish, 6-ish years ago. And then brutalism evolved, kind of like flat design did to flat 2.0, into neo-brutalism, which I'm actually a big fan of. And it took kind of like the techniques from brutalist design and used them in tasteful ways so that they're not as old school and hardcore and in your face as brutalism.
Yeah.
And those kind of surfaced maybe like 2 or 3 years ago in line with the last design trend, neumorphism, which is a combination of skeuomorphism and flat design. Okay. Again, them being counterparts, having pros and cons. Neumorphism is kind of a 50-50 blend of the two. Very hard to describe without visuals, but you could look it up to kind of see what that looks like. And so that neo-brutalism have been the newer design movements within the last 2 or 3 years. There's probably one going on right now for what's next, but it hasn't been technically classified yet. So I look at lots of different websites across the internet and can discern which kind of category or genre it falls into. And then I will kind of, depending on a client's branding or how the direction they want to go with a site, I might go in one of the directions of those movements.
Yeah, you just got right into my next question of how do you decide, which movements or trends align with the look and feel of a client's branding. So I feel like you kind of just answered that.
Yeah. Well, typically we're not going back into skeuomorphism anymore, really.
Yeah.
We do. Majority of our work is still flat design. I think that's kind of here to stay.
Yeah.
You have to have a very particular branding to get into neo-brutalism or neumorphism. But that Educational Society for Computer Science Teachers, their brand style was very much neo-brutalism. So we kind of took to the design in that direction. Again, not something I often get to do. So that's why I was excited to work on that project.
I'm really excited to look all these up afterwards. It sounds so cool. So moving on to the last factor of web design that we're going to talk about today, and that's just design inspiration. Where do you typically find inspiration when starting a new design project?
There are a lot of sources that I look at. There are going to be design blogs. So those are going to maybe have a bunch of content creators in the design industry, and they're going to make articles in different areas of design, not just website design. It could be graphic design, print design, illustration, kind of all encompassing for design. There are going to be design galleries that kind of curate websites that come out, and they'll update and show you new websites in different styles, and they'll actually classify them in some of the movements I've described. Design galleries specifically for websites, and then there's design galleries sort of in line with the blogs where it's anything and everything that's like digital creatives. And then the last source are design website awards websites.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about because I submit a lot of our website projects for these awards. Okay. So I feel like I've looked through a ton of those.
Yeah, and there's varying levels of them. There's a couple that I reference that are kind of like larger and well known, and they focus on.
Do you remember what the names of those are?
Yeah, Webby Awards is a big one.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they still do it. They used to do conferences, and they get like very big celebrity names that would announce these awards. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, very high profile. Yeah. One I look at all the time is it's called AWWWR. It's like awards with 3 W's in it.
Okay, I
don't know how to pronounce it, but awards. So that's another big one that I look at.
Yeah, I was just going to ask my next question, which is, are there any specific, websites or design blogs or anything that you look at for inspiration? And you just mentioned awards. Is there anything else that you look at?
Yeah, so for design blogs, The two big ones I look at are Web Design Depot. That one's been around for a while. So sometimes those come and go.
Yeah.
Like they fade off, and maybe the content creators just get bored. I don't know, but some of them fade off. Web Design Depot has been around for a while, and they refresh. They always have a cool design themselves. They're a good reference. They've got a lot of good content articles on design. And then my favorite is actually called. It's a weird name, but it's Portuguese. It's Abduzido.
Okay.
And it was actually like a underground designer in the early 2000s. That's Portuguese, and abduzido, it actually translates to like abducted, which I think is an interesting name for a design.
I mean, you're
blog.
certainly going to remember it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's very out there.
Yeah, and his blog site's really nice, and he was actually like eventually discovered by Google, and then they hired him. So he's like an underground big design name.
Oh, I gotta so many things to look up after this.
Yeah, and his blog, they do a lot of it's a lot of digital design. So sometimes it's website design, a lot of the times it's illustration, package design, branding. So that covers design blogs, and then design galleries. There are a couple I look at. One is another name that's weird to pronounce. It's HTTPster. I think .net, and it'll just be a wall of different websites and a link to the actual website, so you can see kind of new launches, new styles. That's a good one. Siteinspire.com.
I think I've heard of that one.
Yeah, that one's been around for a while. And then kind of my secret one that not a lot of people know about, but that I look at all the time, and it is probably the best source of inspiration specifically for website designs. It's called Landbook.
Landbook?
Yeah, land-book.
Okay.
And they update their feed. They usually put out 3 or 4 websites daily that are new, and they're all just like slam dunk designs. So I go there a lot, and you can filter through different styles, or if you're looking for different techniques, you can filter through their whole design repository. But that one's my secret sauce.
Oh, I'm excited to look at that one too. So have you ever worried about whether or not a front-end developer will actually be able to implement your designs? Or maybe not, because I feel like you said a lot of them are, a lot of things that we do are flat design, but what about like the crazy ones?
So yes and no. We always have to be cognizant of what the developers can do, and it could vary by platform too.
Right. Yeah.
If the platform's flexible enough, as well as the budget of the project. The more wild we usually get, the more hours it could eat up, especially on the development side.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But normally we're pretty safe. Again, if we design using best practices, still get creative, but don't go over the top, then we usually don't have any issues. But we do have a front-end developer review as part of the design process.
Oh, gotcha. To make sure that, it's not going to be something that they know they won't be able to do.
Yeah. They'll point out any sort of red flags, and if there's any issues, then we'll kind of find an easier solution for different things that we've incorporated.
I gotcha. So I have one more question for you today, Noah. Say a marketing team is getting ready to redesign their website. What are 3 considerations they should, think about upfront at the start of the project when initially engaging with the agency to ensure that their finished product meets their expectations?
Sure. So the first one is communication and thoroughness of communication. And this relates to that sort of kickoff call and to the onboarding questionnaire we send them. Again, in that scenario, more is more. So as much information as you can give us as possible, as much examples as you can give us as possible. If they may not be able to describe kind of their vision, using reference points is usually the best way to kind of narrow that down. And then making sure, all the stakeholders for their project are involved early and getting their input. Again, those needs and wants, and making sure we have all of that up front, because that's really going to make the process smoother overall, instead of getting halfway through it and then them saying, actually, we don't like blue anymore. We want to change the color scheme or what have you. So communication and as being as thorough as possible. And then if we are adhering to, if they have a brand guideline, this is the second point. If they have a brand guideline and we're adhering to that as close as possible, seeing how their creative team or any creative or any other designers they've hired have applied that brand guideline, because again, it can be interpreted in different ways,
right,
in different marketing channels. So social media ads, how are they applying the brand guidelines to that? How are they applying it to maybe brochures they've made? How are they applying it to company PowerPoint decks, so that we can take those styles and then incorporate it into the website, so that they kind of have a consistent brand across all of those mediums. Because we usually don't get that stuff up front, and then I'll ask for it, and then I'll get it. So they have it. So making sure like anything and everything visual they can provide up front is available to us. And then the third thing, and this is a big thing I promote, is investing in photography. Photos can absolutely make or break your website.
Yeah.
Especially if it's e-commerce. And if we do work on an e-commerce site, we'll always get product photos, but something we don't always get are lifestyle photos. And consumers, they want to see, like, how does this product fit into my life?
Yeah.
Right. How can I relate to it? So there was one potential client we were working with that was sort of a disruptor in the fireworks industry.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, they're really, really cool brand. They're really fun guys, and they had a lot of great product photography, but they didn't have any lifestyle photography. And for their business, like, that should be an easy thing to kind of curate.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. So, setting up scenarios where the fireworks are being used.
Yeah.
So that they have those sort of images, photography available. And majority of the time we don't get photos from clients, and we kind of have to rely on stock photography, which is not the end all be all, but it's just not going to be as authentic.
Yeah, I feel like you can tell the difference between stock photography and, a brand's actual, own lifestyle photos.
Right. So really investing in hiring a photographer, making sure that they're getting the right product shots, they're getting the right lifestyle photography. If you have a service, maybe what that looks like in action that you can incorporate to the site. And not only are they going to get the shots done correctly, like the right angles, the right lighting and everything, they're also going to do post photo shoot editing.
Right. Yeah.
So in Photoshop, they'll apply filters. They might remove blemishes or different things that shouldn't have made it into the photo, and create like a final polished product specific to the photography. So that there's a cost up front for that, but the value that it brings is usually far surpasses that and is worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Noah, thank you so much for joining us today. That's all the time we have. I learned a lot. I know our listeners will learn a lot, and I appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Modern Marketing Messages. For more information about the topic discussed today, check out the description of this episode. If you like this episode, follow the podcast wherever you listen to them to stay up to date with us. While you're at it, give us a rating and share this podcast with others. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Modern Marketing Messages. This episode is brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios. I'm Taylor Karg, and I'll be back with another Modern Marketing Message.